Primary season is heating up. The candidates have turned their attention to Michigan ahead of tomorrow's primary in the Wolverine State. NBC News correspondent Gabe Gutierrez has more on where things stand.
Haley in Michigan today after a landslide defeat in her home state, South Carolina. And now a key conservative group created by the billionaire Koch brothers says it will stop donating to the Haley campaign, writing, "We don't believe any outside group can make a material difference to widen her path to victory." The former president, now having won the first 4 contests by wide margins, is looking ahead to the general election.
We're going to look at Joe Biden, and we're going to look him right in the eye. He's destroying our country, and we're going to say, "Joe, you're fired."
Tomorrow's primary here in Michigan is high stakes not just for Haley, but for President Biden, who's facing fierce backlash over the Israel-Hamas war.
Free Palestine!
Voters from Michigan's huge Arab-American population have demanded the president support a ceasefire. Some now plan to vote uncommitted in protest.
My direct message to President Biden is that you cannot continue to use my American tax dollars to aid and abet in an ongoing genocide of my people.
Late today, President Biden said he hopes for a deal to release the hostages held by Hamas soon.
And my hope is by next Monday, we'll have a ceasefire.
Governor Gretchen Whitmer is a national co-chair of Biden's campaign.
What if uncommitted has a strong showing in this primary?
I think there will be a sizable number of votes for uncommitted. I think that it is every person's right to make their statement about what's important to them.
Whitmer now under pressure to deliver the state for President Biden, and she brushes off voter concerns about his age, saying the president could serve until he's 86.
For more, I want to welcome Don Calloway, Democratic strategist and host of the Caucus Room podcast. The first episode drops tomorrow, and Reed Galen is here, co-founder of the Lincoln Project. He has also worked on a number of GOP campaigns, including John McCain, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and George W. Bush. Don, let's start, obviously, in Michigan and talk about Democrats and sort of the divided situation there because of the situation in Gaza. Speak to that.
You know, I want to be clear that I expect that the vast majority of Democrats all across the Democratic spectrum support a full ceasefire and support stopping the genocide that's happening in Gaza. Nobody approves of that. But I have never seen an Overton window shift this quickly in favor of the large number of uncommitted votes that Representative Rashida Tlaib has encouraged and that huge Arab American community in Michigan will probably achieve. Will Biden win? Absolutely. Uncommitted is not going to defeat President Biden, but it will be a strong showing. I expect 30 to maybe even 40, 50,000 votes in favor of uncommitted, but Gretchen Whitmer will still deliver the state, but it will end up being a strong statement that is not only representative of that Arab community, but representative of the larger Democratic progressive community. But I certainly don't expect that it will be any much of a major stumbling block for Biden going forward beyond Michigan.
Reed, what about the strong statement from South Carolina? Yes, Donald Trump won, when the first thing he said on the podium was how united the party was. It's certainly not. Nikki Haley got roughly 40% of the vote. Yes, it's her home state, but it is a deep red state where both Republican senators are fawning all over Donald Trump. What do those results tell you?
Well, look, I think that it's a repeat electorally of Iowa, New Hampshire, and now South Carolina. Trump has not consolidated his base, has not consolidated the Republican Party. And so what I would say is this, is that she is going to stay in the race however long it is. And you know what? I'm agnostic, Stephanie, as to why she stays in, if it's for 2028 or because she's waiting around for Trump to get sick or get arrested or whatever it is. Like, I don't care. I'm glad she's out there. And I think she should stay out there as long as she wants to, as long as she can make a dent in him. From my perspective, that's good for all of us. And what I would say is this, is that if you look at the at the South Carolina results, there were 25% of people in South Carolina, Republican primary voters, who said they wouldn't vote for Trump. That is catastrophic, singularly catastrophic for Trump. He can't lose more votes, Stephanie. He can't. He's got a majority, vast majority, 90-some% white coalition, right? It is a big monolith. And right now what we're seeing is cracks in that monolith. And the more he does this year, the crazier he's going to be. Remember, the way to keep his base fired up is to say and do crazier and crazier things. And as he does that, he will push more and more Nikki Haley type Republicans back into the undecided pool.
So, Don, those 25% who said they will not vote for Donald Trump, does that make Saturday night, at the end of the day, a big win for Biden, even if he peels 5 or 10% of them off?
I'm not sure that it does, because I'm less concerned about Saturday night. I'm more concerned about November. And that does not mean that those 25% go Democratic and pull the Joe Biden lever in November. I just don't see it. You'll probably see the No Labels party getting a little bit, or the No Labels non-party, whatever they deem themselves, getting a little bit stronger. You may see a legitimate third-party candidate, not someone who can be a legitimate siphon of electoral votes, but somebody who can make a statement in November. I really don't see it being something for Biden. That 25% is not going to Joe Biden. Biden's got to continue to concentrate on voters who are turning 18 for the first time in 2024 and not losing the people at the margins, a la the people who want a free Palestine and the small percentage of younger African Americans who are leaning Trump or leaning more agnostic. Remember, the couch is always on the ballot when you're talking about the broad Democratic coalition. I don't see that never Trump Republicans making a big dent in favor of Democrats. So Biden's got to stay focused on building the broad coalition.
Well, there is one very outspoken Joe Biden surrogate who will not accept that on the ballot is the couch or democracy. He is simply saying there's way too much at stake. I want to share a bit of what California Governor Gavin Newsom told our colleague Kristen Welker yesterday.
I think what Democrats need to do is worry less, do more, continue to overperform as we have, continue to win, make the case. Don't be ashamed of 4.1% GDP over the last 2 quarters. Don't be ashamed about the alliance management of the Biden-Harris administration. Don't be timid about making the case for the record of this administration.
Mic drop, Reed Galen. He is clearly making the most aggressive, positive case for President Biden. Does the president need a whole lot more of that from his team?
Absolutely. I mean, listen, the one thing we know about Biden is he's been a fighter his whole life. This is not a guy, he's not shrinking violet. And his campaign needs to start now reflecting more of him. They need to go out and throw some punches. They need to go take victory laps. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago when I was on the air with you, Stephanie. Like, go spread the gospel, tell the good news, right? And yes, he is going to pick up some soft Republicans who don't want Trump. And I'll tell you this, too, just as a response, it doesn't matter of that 25% if they vote for Biden. If they stay home, that's bad for Trump, too. And so what I would say is this, is the president and surrogates like Governor Whitmer, like Governor Newsom, should be out there all day, every day. The presidency is not one man or one woman. The presidency is the White House, the administration, the surrogates, all of the money, all of the people in the states, and they need to start acting in concert holistically, not only to secure the votes for the nomination, but also to start telling soft Republicans, you don't have to go back to Donald Trump, independents saying you want nothing to do with this guy, and Democrats saying, are you really, you're going to sit on the couch? That's what you're going to do in November? Because do you know what this guy did on day one the last time? Imagine that 1,000x come 2025.